Welcome everyone. Apologies for absence.
Apologies for Councillor Thompson.
Item 2 to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held 26th of September 2022, pages 7 to 18. Councillor Walker, opposed. Seconded Councillor Phillips. All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was just looking through. Yes, there is a resolution in that. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. All those in favour of approval? Yeah, unanimous. Thank you. Item 3, items brought forward within the opinion of the chair should be considered by the meeting as a matter of urgency. There are none. Item 4, declarations of interest. Anyone? No. Obviously, something comes up in the process of the meeting, just declare it then. Item 5, to agree the agenda between Part A and Part B.
Mr. Chair,
There's no Part B.
in Part A, we resolved in the last meeting, recorded in the minutes, number 25B. Have I missed the agenda item where that's to be covered tonight?
This is the request for the head of housing, planning, housing and health to be invited to talk about the planning figures.
All right, yes.
But that wasn't picked up at the chairman's meeting, so there is no item on the agenda.
Okay, so we'll have to postpone that to the one next one, Councillor Richard.
But council has resolved that it to happen at this meeting on this date.
Yeah.
So are we going against the councillor's resolution?
In essence, you are, but we can only discuss items that are actually on the agenda. And so that was missed off when setting the draft agenda and wasn't picked up at the chairman's meeting. So we don't have an item on the agenda under which we can slot that.
How has that happened when it's quite clearly resolved that we were going to do it?
As I
I
said,
mean, it's really important that we do follow the resolutions which are made in meetings.
Matt, you are correct. So I think, can we make sure that that's on the next agenda?
Yeah.
Nothing we can do about it now.
there isn't a because you'll be acting unlawfully if you discuss items that aren't actually on the agenda. It should have been on the agenda. It isn't on the agenda.
I think we need to find out exactly why that happens and to make sure it doesn't happen again.
But Chair, as I just said, it was missed off and wasn't picked up at the chairman's meeting.
Yeah, I don't think that's very cool.
We'll move on then, Matt, and we'll be on the next agenda. So are we agreeing Part A and Part B, councillors? Yeah. You. No Part B. Item 6, internal audit progress report, pages 19 to 30, report by Devon Audit Partnership.
Yeah, so Paul McMahon from Devon Audit Partnership, I'm your audit manager. So this is the standard report for the Governance Committee, starting on page 21. So we're saying overall the council's on track for a reasonable assurance opinion. As you can see, the chart on the right shows the 2 substantial, 3 reasonable and 2 limited reports that we've reported on so far, and obviously we're proceeding on other reports as we're continuing. So there will be core factual audits. So yes, we report substantial assurances for housing benefits and also council tax relating to housing benefits. It's good to see the level of the number of quality assurance checks being taken has increased and are back to sort of pre-COVID levels. However, again, we provide a limited opinion on debt management. Obviously, we know that a significant level of debt related to the 2 housing schemes. So that's the bulk, I suppose, of the debt that you're currently carrying. But we also say perhaps there needs to be a more systematic approach to debt management. So, for instance, where debt is written off, for instance, where someone's deceased, but other debts are not written off. So there's a reputational risk of that in terms of from someone who's deceased. Or for instances where the debtor company is being dissolved and some debts written off, but other debts are not written off and so on. So those are sort of two areas where we sort of, the amount of debt and also the more systematic debt management approach. In terms of the risk-based audit, so we obviously noted the significant pressure that the waste and recycling services is under, and obviously there's a big sense that it's sort of firefighting. We did come to a conclusion it was a reasonable assurance opinion, as it was meeting the data collection requirements, but some of the sort of recommendations were about there needs to be more focus on how to increase capacity and meet, the national recycling rates target that needs to meet in the next few years. On the equality and diversity report, again, we provided a limited, probably well on two basic grounds. So while we said it's, it is doing good work on supporting influenced staff on issues, mental health, well-being, and so on, and also putting an emphasis on accessibility for the public and so on. However, the council is still not meeting with the legal requirements to provide sort of annual equality information under the Equality Act, and also ensuring that staff actually undertake the equality and diversity training. So Appendix 1 provides us with more detail on those audits, and then the executive summary goes on to about council fraud. So there's some narrative in there. So I think there's an estimate that 40% of all crime is fraud related, and so we intend to do a fraud risk assessment, and we're doing it also for the other councils as well. So we'll be looking to take that in the next couple of months and come back to this committee, having and report to you on that. We're also progressing the council tax single person discount review. So I think at the previous meeting we said we've got agreement from the head of Devon County Council Finance that they would pay for a review. So we're asking DCC procurement to go out and procure an agency to take this review of single person discounts. And I think we're adopting the one that will be least work for councils involved. So the agency will be doing a lot more of the kind of work. And then finally, risk management. So yes, we'll be doing a view on risk management here in quarter 4. Again, we're sort of covering the other districts as well as a sort of compare class exercise, try and pick up and communicate good practice. So so that's the basic summary work. So happy to take any questions.
I mean, I've got some questions, obviously. Are we going to be introducing under waste and recycling a systematic process to assess the public's view on the service provided, as recommended on page 27? And the other one was the annual equality information related to the council workforce and local area is not being published, which is a requirement of the public sector equality duty. Are we going to be doing that?
In relation to the equality one, Chair, we are partway there already. The community impact information is on the website. Just looking at the internal issues that lead to this one. With the waste and recycling, what the management response to that one is.
Chair, but sorry, just in fact, the background was in essence, I think that's the sole source of finding out if the public was happy with the service was that complaints being received, and that I suppose is fairly standard approach from a lot of service areas. And we've said to waste recycling, well, you need to think about how you get more feedback from the public about the level of service. You know, there's various mechanisms where, you know, sort of asking people to fill in surveys or whatever, so, that's the background behind it.
Can't recall management response, but obviously customer services team do customer service questionnaires, in terms of feedback for all the council services, so our head of customer focus would be discussing that with Mark, the head of the service, being volunteer involvement around how we relate that customer response, but in customer surveys currently, so we just form part of that review we do already.
Make sure that's in.
Yes.
And also.
I'll double check the management response went back, it's not on, obviously on this detail, but make sure that's embedded in that response.
Any other questions, councillors, for that internal auditor?
Yeah, just got one chair.
Councillor Anderson.
Just under the equality and diversity again, it's just in that last sentence, there's only limited understanding and analysis of the reason for staff leaving the council. It needs to be done to ensure the exit interviews are held and reasons for departure captured. I think my concern on that one is the fact that obviously it's very difficult to recruit at the moment, and if we're not hanging on to those staff, you know, do we actually know the true reasons why they're leaving? It's obviously been highlighted here. So just wondering what is the council doing to ensure that process actually happens? Because I've always viewed the exit interviews with any staff as being actually really crucial.
So again, Chair, if I just say, so I think the wording from HR was that exit interviews were offered, and I was just thinking, well, you know, if they're still working for you, you can actually ask them to come in and say, and have that exit interview while they're still working for you. So it's possible to do that.
Should that be written into the contract of employment? So it actually becomes almost mandatory as opposed to optional. I'm just thinking. Yeah.
I'm not sure if we can do that, because we're on some terms and conditions negotiated by the union, so I doubt it's in there. I think we can encourage it and be quite strong in our encouragement. But if somebody's leaving,
yeah,
anyway, we don't have much of a sort of room to persuade them to do things anyway. So we wouldn't be able to say, come in, otherwise you're sad, because they're off the way out anyway.
Yeah, coming from a press background, you can always sneak in and not tell anybody and then just bump it on people. But,
But
yeah,
we do encourage it, but I know there are areas where staff are less inclined to come in and do that exit.
actually, yeah.
Councillor Bushy.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow on from Councillor Henderson's comments, because if we had the correct agenda for tonight, there were two occurrences within the planning, housing and health department where people resigned and then it was negotiated that they stay. And I felt very strongly that if the communication is so bad that people have to quit before people take note of the fact that they are not happy, then that's not really acceptable for the council. And that levels of communication should be such that if there is any way of negotiating to keep the person, we don't force them to quit or make them feel that they need to quit before those conversations can happen. But we can't discuss it tonight because we failed to follow the resolution at the last meeting.
So if I may, the resolution, just to be clear, as this is a public meeting, resolution at the last meeting was to ask the head of that team to come in to talk about the planning figures. In particular, it was in relation to extensions that were granted on particular applications, and members were concerned that we were asking for extensions on too many applications, not to talk about specific issues relating to individuals within the team. And again, just to clarify, the incident that, or the occasion that Councillor Bush was talking about, was where a member of staff had indicated that they wished to leave. That was purely because of their personal circumstances when they were home now, not to do with the fact they were unhappy with their employment. And what the council were able to do is to listen to that individual and change their employment hours of work, etc., to more readily fit with their home life. On the basis of that individual was quite happy to stay at the council. So it wasn't the case of somebody being ignored until they you know, they reached the end of their tether and decided to put in their notice.
I did say in the address a second ago that there were 2 occurrences, of which I'm sure you're well aware. The resolution doesn't say that it's specifically around the planning figures, and I have talked to the head of service about this very specific matter, so they're aware that when it came into governance, that was one of my concerns. And they did indicate that there were measures that could be used to increase the level of conversation with staff. So if there is even a very small difficulty or improvement that can be made within the systems that we have, even to try and streamline things and reduce the resources that we're putting into each application, that he would have a look at that, and this would have been a perfect opportunity for him to then come back on the things. He seemed very aware of all of the matters that I raised with him when I spoke to him, and it would have been a great opportunity for him to be able to say to the governance committee, yes, I understand that there are areas where things aren't working as smoothly as they can, and I've identified them. There wasn't a single thing that I identified to him that he didn't have an answer for, and I took great solace in that, but still felt that it's the duty of the governance committee and not an individual councillor to have these discussions, although I did think it was right that he was aware of the concerns I had before we addressed them in this meeting.
I think we've got, it's been highlighted in the internal auditors report. The chief exec has come back and said that there are things that we can strongly encourage around the exit surveys, which is good. So I think that answers that for now, but obviously we will get more and more. So can we, oh, sorry, Chairman. So,
the only comment I would make is that perhaps in the future, if councillors want things actually put onto the agenda, it would be a good idea if they actually let the chairman know in advance, so that when we have the actual meeting to set the agenda, that the item is before us and we can make the appropriate arrangements. Perhaps that would be a good way forward, something that we can learn from out of this discussion.
Chair, I mean, we'll certainly take that on, but I mean, to be fair to members, it is something that should have been picked up on before the chairman's agenda meeting, actually been picked up at the chairman's meeting. Jeremy Mann was quite happy to come along tonight, but unfortunately, as I said, the item isn't on the agenda, and so we couldn't discuss it. That's the basic principle, but it's a lesson to be learned, and we will ensure that it's on the agenda for the.
Mr. Chair, if I may, is it not the officer's job to make sure the resolutions of councillors are carried out, not that councillors constantly send in emails asking for things to be done when we've already resolved that they will be happening?
yeah, is very simple. Right, any more questions on the report? No, so can I have a proposal that we want the report? Yeah, Councillor Anderson, seconded Councillor Lutfield, all in favour? Thank you very much. Item 7, external audit progress report and sector update, pages 31 to 44, report by Grant Thornton. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. So this is a progress report that sets out our position against the 21-22 audit. If I refer members of the committee to page 34 of their papers, you'll recall at the previous meeting at the end of September, we indicated that our work on the opinion was substantially complete. You'll see that in our progress report on that page, although it was substantially complete, there were a large number of bullet points where further work was required to conclude on our work. Most of those were very well progressed, and it was only bits and bobs that were outstanding. Very pleased to be able to report to members of the committee that very good progress has been made since that last meeting. You'll see on the right hand side of the same page, at the time of drafting this report, there were two remaining issues. The first one is in relation to the letter of assurance that we seek from the auditor of Devon Pension Fund. That does still remain outstanding, as it has done in previous years, although the auditor is a colleague of mine, and I'm reliably informed that that will be with me in the next week. The second bullet point that was outstanding at the time of drafting this report was concluding our work on property, plant and equipment. Pleased to be able to say that that's all now been concluded on. There is one point that I do need to bring to the attention of members. It's not a significant issue, but given that my report, my detailed report, was taken to the previous meeting of this committee, it would be helpful, Chair, if this could be minuted. So I'll go slowly with this, but essentially, in terms of the work that we've done on property, plant, equipment, one error has been identified, which is where your valuers have incorrectly calculated the valuation of the commercial road car park. That is based on yields to arrive at that value, and the incorrect management fee had been factored in as part of that calculation. The impact of that is very small. It is £65,000. And on that basis, officers have decided not to adjust for that, and we concur with that. But under auditing standards, I am required to report to you in my report anything over trivial, and trivial for the council has been set at 50k. So we have, on the back of that, carried out some additional procedures across all car park valuations to ensure that this is an isolated error, which it is. So the important thing for members of this committee is, given that all those areas were outstanding at the last committee, there are no further issues with the exception of that one in relation to the commercial road car park that we need to bring to your attention. And hopefully, following receipt of the letter of assurance in relation to the pension fund, we will be able to issue an unqualified opinion on your financial statements ahead of the 30th of November 22 deadline. And I suspect if we are to achieve that in the next 2 weeks, you will be one of a very small select number of councils nationally that have actually achieved the deadline for 21-22. So that is the opinion position as of today. Clearly, given it's the public sector, as auditors, our role extends beyond the opinion and also includes the value for money conclusion. This is detailed on page 35. Suffice to say that we are in the early stages of undertaking our VFM work for 21-22, and I'd previously written to the chair of this committee, and that was on the previous agenda, outlining the timelines that we'll be working to. So we will commence that work in detail over the next few weeks and look to conclude that early in the new year, with the aspiration of bringing what we call our auditor's annual report to a later meeting of this committee early in the new year. And that will then conclude our work in terms of our statutory role in relation to 21-22. You'll also see briefly on page 35, we set out the other areas of work that we do for yourselves, which is essentially the housing benefits subsidy claim. That has a deadline at the end of January, and work is underway on that, but the majority of the work for that will be undertaken in January, with the intention of hitting that deadline as well. So, Chair, that is a very brief canter through where we're at. We're in a good position for 21-22, but there is a bit more work to do over the next couple of months. That's the position against the audit. As always, this report also contains a sector update. So this is reports, commentary from third parties on all issues to do with audit that may be relevant and informative to members of this committee, and for that matter, the wider council members. Chair, I'm not minded to go through those in detail. I do appreciate that some of them are quite old and have probably been overtaken by events, given some of the turmoil nationally within central government, but nonetheless happy to take questions on progress on the 21-2 audit or the sector update.
Thank you. Can I just ask, Mr. Triggs to come in on the 65k issue.
Yeah, actually, that was the first I'd heard of it, so obviously that's come as a news to me. Also, I know that the final pieces of work on PPE have been concluded over the last couple of days, so, but as Pete's outlined, the materiality of that figure isn't big enough to change our accounts, so we wouldn't change that under normal circumstances. So we're happy that obviously the recommended approach will pick up and make sure it's reflected in the statements when we do them for next financial year evaluations. So yeah, as has been set out, we would accept that. It's a trivial item rather than a material item. So we won't be changing the statement of accounts. But in terms of the progress, obviously really pleased that we're in a position that we can get the accounts signed off by the end of November and the final opinion issued. The position is obviously positive because we're one of the only authorities that obviously in the country that would be in that position. We're only a small number of authorities that have done. Quite a few are still obviously having their previous year's accounts still to be signed off as well. So to have the 21-22 accounts signed off is really pleasing.
I think it's important, councillors, that we do know that 65 figure, as the external auditor has said. And any questions on the report? No, I think it's a straightforward one. Peter, you let off lightly tonight.
Shall I just make one?
Also,
comment?
councillor,
Yeah.
you knew he was.
Yeah, no, it's all right. Yeah, you don't need a heart attack. It's just an observation more than anything. Given that, just looking at your report here, particularly response to the local audit consultation, Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. And I think since that was published, we're on our third Prime Minister, so it must be really difficult for you as auditors to actually know what you're judging the council against the standards, because it must be like a moving carpet at the moment from Westminster. It must make your certain aspects of your role really, really difficult.
I actually think that, interestingly, the external audit role is quite well defined and is not changing significantly as a result of all the turmoil. So clearly the opinion is based on auditing and accounting standards, which are there and have not changed in the short term. And obviously the value for money role is based on the NAO code that is updated every 5 years, and 21-22 will be the second year of the new VFM code, which is very clear on, for us as auditors, VFM means financial resilience, governance, and the 3 E's. So I think I'm pretty clear on my role, and I think hopefully the committee are as well. Ironically, I think the bigger challenge is for yourselves, particularly the Section 151 officer and members, in terms of setting a budget and developing a medium-term financial plan that is realistic and achievable, given all the uncertainty out there in terms of future funding. So, you know, I appreciate, and I think I've made reference to this in my previous value for money report, and no doubt it will form part of the 21-22 VFM report, particularly on financial resilience. The difficult challenge that you face at the moment, which is, you know, you are embarking on the work to inform the budget for 23-24 that will go to full council in February. You've got lots of unknowns there. You will have to make lots of assumptions. You'll have to think about different scenarios and what you might do in that situation. And if I'm brutally honest, you know, that it appears that there won't be a white knight coming across, you know, the hill with lots of money, and austerity continues to bite, and with the cost of living, ever increasing expectations from the public, and things like your utility bills and the recent pay award, etc., putting further pressure on your already stretched budget. So that is something that I'm cited on, and I need to have regard to in discharging my role.
We want to be a councillor these days, Peter. That's what I say. So thanks for that, Mr. Triggs.
Yes. People want to be a Section 151, Mr. Chair. It's just to reassure members and also to update Pete as well. Obviously, we are taking a paper to full council next Wednesday, which is looking at the budget pressures we've been facing this year in terms of the inflation pressures that Pete alluded to. Also, the uncertainty around government funding. We hope the autumn statement on Thursday give us some indication in terms of clarity around whether government funding is being frozen or not, and whether it goes down to departmental level. Again, will give us hopefully some indication. We've made certain assumptions and refreshed the medium-term financial plan, and we've also had early conversations with members. We've carried out a couple of budget workshops informally, cross-party, which were taking place in August and October. Those options that were discussed are reflected in the paper that's coming to full council next Wednesday, for members to make an informed decision about options into the 23-24 budget and beyond. So that potentially looks to bridge the gaps that are being forecast. But as has been alluded to, there is some uncertainty in that in terms of the level of government funding that we may or may not receive. So it's important that we discuss that early, and that's why the paper's coming to November. Normally, you wouldn't receive that until it comes as part of the budget papers in February. So early discussions with members at the budget workshops. Those options then from those workshops are coming to members for decision next Wednesday, in advance then of the detailed budget setting that would normally take place. So hopefully that reassures the auditors that we've taken an early approach to that budget setting, to get early member buy-in on those decisions.
Councillor Anderson.
Will there be enough information in the autumn statement to make a correct decision to members next week?
There will hopefully be sufficient reassurance around whether there are any significant cuts to public sector funding. The early indications, what was reported in the news last night, is that there'd be potentially a public sector spending freeze in terms of maybe the same level of funding as what's been announced for 22-23 being the same level of funding for 23-24. They talk about it generally in public sector spending rather than down to departments. So they don't specifically say local government will get the same amount of money. So we don't know whether it's the same amount of money in the total pot for public sector spending, but they might cut the cake fully, or whether they're saying it's the same amount of funding for everybody that they got for 22-23. Even if it's the same level of funding, in essence, that is a funding cut because the inflation pressures that we've seen this year far exceed what we had in terms of funding last year. And therefore, even if we get the same amount of cash, the pay bill going up by potentially £1 million over and above what we budgeted, that in essence is a pay cut, is a funding cut that we would see in terms of government funding. But I'm hoping that they would at least give certainty that it's a freeze rather than a cut to public sector spending.
So because also there's rumours flying around that they're going to lift the cap on the 2% increase in the council tax. So we may be faced with a decision to make up any shortfalls. Great increase on the council tax. So I think the same on next Thursday, and then the meeting following week. Sorry, the second Thursday and the meeting next week. I think there'll probably be a lot more questions coming out of it, as opposed to potentially answers, because I think we're going to have to make some quite tough decisions as members. Potentially, we need to keep the level of service, but we'll have to wait and see.
And like I say, I'm hoping Thursday gives a bit of certainty about the council tax potential rises. At the moment, that threshold is in there at below 3% or £5 for district councils. At the moment, we've assumed a £5 increase. Again, that's subject to member approval. The discussions, or what's been put in the press at the moment around potential council tax rises, that may only be around the upper tier authorities and the ability in terms of adult social care and that reset, rather than all district councils maybe being able to rise by 5% or whatever. So I'm hoping Thursday gives some certainty, and we will reflect that when we present the paper to members next week. But you're right, there are some key important decisions members take to bridge that budget gap for 23-24 beyond.
Following on from that question, if it's not just the upper tier, as in the county council, the rumour is that it's going to be 5%. That's just one rumour that's going around, isn't it? We'll put the increase above 5%. Is the £5 on our council, or the 5%? What's 5% to us? More than £5 or not?
Yeah, it'd be more than £5. The £5 last year was 3%, I think it was. So obviously, I'm looking at say a higher than £5 increase. But again, that is subject to members wanting to raise council tax to bridge the gap, or if they don't bridge it that way, they also need to make other decisions in terms of bridging the gap from service changes.
Yeah, it's probably worth pointing out that the gap that we've identified is will never maybe bridged just by the council tax. So even if they did push that by 5%, allowed us to put 5%, we would still need to look for other measures such as challenges, increasing income, etc., to bridge that gap.
Tough choices. Right. I don't think there's any more questions for Peter, is there? No. Peter, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I have a proposer that we note the report, please? Councillor Walker, seconder, please. Councillor Phillips, all in favour? Unanimous, thank you, councillors. Thank you, Peter. Right, now, item 8 is the audit recommendation tracker. Report by Chief Executive. Please remember that there's a supplement, which is the updated version on this. So you're not looking at the old version, so no questions on the old version. There was a circulated a newer version, updated version. Over to you, Mr. Chief Executive.
Chair. It's the normal report that you get, split into the various tables, main ones being table B, which sets out the audit recommendations that have been completed since the last committee. And you mentioned just now, Chair, the fact that this is an updated report. The main change to the report is that the last 4 items in table 4 were previously in the overdue and requested, or in table C, actually, in table C, requested a review on the due date. They've now been completed and now appear in table B. Table C is the 4 recommendations where a revision to the due date is requested. Hopefully the notes are fairly self-explanatory. The couple that I'll draw attention to, I guess. The first one is from the emergency planning audit. And I just add there, the note refers to Operation London Bridge, which is the Queen's passing, and the avian influenza emergency that's caused a delay. There have also been other issues that have covered into the emergency planning arena recently, including the requirement to dig out all over historical information for the national COVID inquiry. So that may have an impact as well, but still hoping that that'll be completed by the end of December. And also just mention again from the emergency planning one, which is the third one, about training. That unfortunately didn't take place. It partly took place, which is unfortunately the Queen's passing was announced partway through the training. Otherwise, it wouldn't be appearing on this list. And again, that's hoped that that training will be delivered through a different means by the 1st of December. The last one around section 11, assurance statement, just so that members are aware, that's a duty that sits with safeguarding children's partnerships. They've got a duty to assess whether all of the agencies within the partnership are fulfilling their duties to safeguard and protect the welfare of children. Within Devon anyway, there is an agreement that that would be a joint assurance, and at the moment we're being held up with by Devon County Council on that. But again, the team are chasing them. Table D is a bit of an anomaly, and I apologise for this. This is one where it's outstanding and there hasn't been a request for a revised date come forward from the manager. I've spoken with the manager today. This is from the planning arena, sorry, from the planning unit. And what it's about is that the previous planning manager had started to speak with some of the consultees because we were having issues with some of the consultees not responding in time, so that was holding up the process. So she started engaging with some of the consultees to try and ensure that their responses were submitted on time. That then stopped partway through the process. We've now got the new planning manager in place. I've been speaking to her this afternoon, and she's picking that up. So there would be a request for an extension until the 31st of December. And then you've got table E, which is the annual governance statement and the actions that arise from that. And you'll see from there various ones that have been completed, some are in progress, and I think there are 2 extensions requested. One is in relation to the procurement strategy and updating the procurement sustainability strategy. And that's requested until the 30th of September, but we need to look at that. I think because that may well be one that we can close down earlier than that. And also the performance indicators, reviewing the performance indicators. But there's some work ongoing at the moment with the LGA and with other local authorities to come up with best practice on those performance indicators. And that's it, James.
Members, councillor Bushy.
I noticed that on the previous document circulated, there's number 19 listed, general data protection regulations. You didn't mention that that's been completed. So is that still overdue?
What's that in?
Table A of the initial document that was sent out.
All right, no, I believe those are closed off.
Okay, you didn't mention, or I didn't hear you mention it in any of the tables for the things that have been closed off.
Highlighting the main changes, because if I remember rightly, the data protection ones were low risk ones, which wouldn't.
Yeah, only 7 low risk, but
Any questions, members? All right, so a proposal that we accept the report and we accept the extensions that have been asked for. And look forward to receiving that training, because I was on that training when it was cancelled halfway through and the Queen's. Yes, it was. Yeah. So can I have a proposal, please? Councillor Henderson, seconded Councillor Phillips, all in favour? Unanimous, thank you very much, Ken. Annual review of committee's effectiveness, pages 63 to 84. Director of Resources and Deputy Executive to report survey results.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this is reported to you in table format following the online survey that we've had 9 respondents this year, which I think is a record. Previous year, I think Kate struggled to get half represented members to complete, so to actually having 9 complete is really positive.
Because you told us all.
I think she did, yes. Going through, obviously, there's around 80 odd questions that were asked. I'm not planning to go through each question because a number of them are fully answered yes, which obviously are those that are shown in blue. What I will do is just go through where some of the answers either are unknown or no, and just provide some clarity. So moving to question 3, there was a question around membership and can the committee perform its role effectively and independently. 7 respondents answered yes, 2 no. And obviously some of that was around the in-quorum occasions that we had with membership of the committee. Also, there was a response added in around allowing members facilities for gender items for overview and scrutiny. We don't have an overview and scrutiny committee anymore. We do have a policy development committee. Obviously, it wouldn't be for this committee to normally recommend what goes on there, but members obviously have a right to ask items to go forward to policy development if you want to. We don't these days have an overview and scrutiny committee. That was under the old executive function. Question 7 was around whether you as chair have previous knowledge and received appropriate training on financial risk management, accounting concepts and standards. All governance committee members have that training at the outset. It's a mandatory training in advance of becoming a member of the governance committee. So the chair and all members receive that training. That's training that we held jointly following the elections 4 years ago around the role of the governance committee, the role of auditors, and also the role of risk management and how risk management is happening in the authority. That training took place after the election, and also we had refreshed training 2 years after. So can confirm that training did take place. 7 answered yes, 2 didn't know. So that's just to provide that clarity to those unknown answers. Question 11 talks about members' skills and experience being assessed and training given for identify gaps. Again, yes, that local that training that was provided hopefully fills those gaps in terms of knowledge around the skills and experience required for the governance committee. In addition to that, we also did local government finance training to add that financial training around the statement of accounts, and also additional member training that was done, say, 4 years ago, plus retrospectively halfway through the term, 2 years as well. In terms of whether members' skills and experiences are assessed in terms of being appointed to the committee, as we know, obviously members are appointed through group leaders as part of the original appointments to committees. At that stage, skills and experience don't think really form part of the criteria for assessment. Obviously, group leaders will determine appropriate members for all of the committees. At that stage, you would hope there are either discussions or assessments carried out in terms of members' appropriateness to sit on the respective committees in terms of their previous experience. That one does tend to come up every time in terms of don't know about the member skills and experience. So there might be a piece of work we need to do around that. And I think certainly
It might be worth noting as well. Any councillor can go on any training. So I know we've had the additional LGA training around governance and finances. So any councillor wants to go ahead and put themselves on that training, that is available through the LGA.
and normally when those courses come out, Chair, we normally do try and circulate them to respective committees to through Kate to get out. Like say the LGA training is very good. It's also free of charge because we are an LGA member. So we do try and get that training out as and when we're made aware of the courses. Item 11, does each member declare their business interest at each committee? Pretty much everybody responded yes. One answer no. Again, let's just provide that clarity. I think you touched on it earlier under item 4. There is an item on the agenda to declare those interests. Also in advance, through discussions with member services, there's a form to fill out in terms of declaring members' interests to be then re-declared at the meeting. So that should get picked up as part of the agenda item. Item 17, the members attending meetings on a regular basis, and if not, obviously this is the one that provided no 5 times, or 5 answers as no. Again, this was around obviously members' attendance. Sometimes we struggle to get a quorum with very poor attendance, and obviously this committee did have to obviously be cancelled once due to that in quorum 18 months ago. Hopefully, moving forwards, that will not cause us an issue. But again, it was flagged up as part of the evaluation of the last 12-month period. Item 27, has the Governance Committee considered how it integrates with other committees that have responsibility for risk management? 5 answered yes, 1 no, 3 don't know. There is some integration in terms of assessing risk when committee reports come through, not necessarily directly to Governance Committee. Obviously, there is that integration, obviously, for Council, where we have reports coming forwards that obviously cover off some elements of risk management in terms of requests for things like capital funding, capital business cases coming forwards, part of the budget and risk management in terms of those reports that are presented to members. But again, that integration with other committees is something that really doesn't tend to happen. So again, I think there probably is something we need to look at there moving forwards, if that's something that members want to consider. The item 29 was around managing the risk of fraud, and have we adopted the anti-fraud and corruption publication that is tied in with the adoption that you'd had of the anti-fraud corruption policy and strategy that was adopted by Governance Committee back in June 2021. We refreshed our anti-fraud and corruption policy and strategy with working with Paul and the team, technical partnership, and brought forward a revised policy and strategy that ties in with the managing of risk, fraud, actions to counter fraud and corruption work through SIPFA. Question 33 talked around internal audit plan and focusing on areas of high risk and concern to the council. Again, 8 answered yes, 1 don't know. So again, just to cover that one off, the internal audit plan that Paul brings forward comes to senior management team for consideration, ties in with the risk management processes and the corporate risk register to look at the highest risk within the authority. So there is linkage there between the internal audit plan and focusing on the high risk areas within the council, and where the next plan for the next 12 months is going to be focusing on those audits. And likewise, obviously, the corporate risk register does come through to this committee as well. Moving forwards, question 39 is talking about specifically around some of the financial policies and treatments, major judgments made, changes in accounting treatments. Three answered, don't know. Again, as you saw in the September meeting, you have the statement of accounts, which obviously you're reviewing the statement of accounts. That includes areas such as the accounting policies, changes in accounting treatment, accounting estimates. So when they're presented, that obviously covers that sort of area in terms of how the accounting financial statements have been brought together. Also, if there are any planned changes to accounting policies, we do have an item within the work programme to bring a separate item in March in advance of producing those statement of accounts where there potentially are changes in accounting treatments in the year. There's one comment on that. Additional comment was around not sure about large write-offs. Write-offs tend not to be included within the main financial statements. They do come as part of the quarterly performance report that comes to strategy and resources and then subsequently onto full council. So members will see that as part of the report to council, not specifically in the performance report. It doesn't come directly to governance committee.
Would we be able to add that in to governance? I don't know who made the comment. I don't think it was me, but it does seem to make a good point that governance might want to know about anything that's serious. And I believe there's only this one large budgetary overrun that has happened in the time that I've been a councillor. I don't know if we could allow it to come to governance. Is that possible?
Obviously, you can have any information you want to see at governance. Obviously, the performance report when we go strategy and resources through to policy development and then onto full council. So I can be
that question in there from the last, when we used to be called the audit committee. Has this changed since?
That's a comment on the survey this time round. In terms of the question,
Yeah, I mean, is this survey from what we've had previously?
it's been updated to reflect, so it has been updated to reflect obviously now it's a governance committee. So
So the fact that it mentions large write-offs sort of implies that large write-offs should come to governance.
the constitution sets out that obviously write-offs below a certain amount of money can be written off service areas. Anything over £1,500, the constitution dictates that myself as chief finance officer in consultation with the leader then approve those write-offs. A summary of that write-offs in terms of that table around the level of write-offs below 1,500 and above 1,500. That is incorporated within the performance report that goes to strategy and resources and then on to full council. If you wanted information around level of write-offs, then that table could be brought to the governance committee.
What I don't want is for this committee to have information which is another committee's responsibility. And I think if it's not our responsibility as a committee, then it should be.
Well, I was just going to say the same, Chair, because as John was just alluded to, that the responsibility for dealing with those matters is really down with the institution, I suppose. That this committee needs to be concerned that the right systems are in place and the right controls are in place. Ensure that write-offs aren't happening when we're in that right and centre. And by all means, look at those controls that we've got in place, satisfy yourself that is the case. And if you feel that the level isn't right or whatever, then that could be a recommendation for the strategy. So that's just an example. Maybe this is more about making sure the controls are in place to ensure that.
And I think that's what Councillor Bush is on about, controls.
I think because it's mentioned in the question, it rather misleads it to the fact of, well, have they been brought? And actually, you're saying that they don't need to be brought, so that might be why.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that actually looking at the comments that was a write-off, that was a budgetary overrun. And I do know members of this committee did pick up on it when it was given to full council from strategy and resources. But equally, I think there might be protections that this committee could overview. Obviously, it was flagged up, but it wasn't flagged up to governance, which maybe, I don't think it was me who wrote that sort of thing should come before governance.
And again, I think it's about the controls, Chair, because that budget overrun has been flagged up as part of the performance report, strategy resources, and then full council. And quite rightly, they would have looked at that when allocated resources or changed the budgets accordingly. Where this committee would get involved, I guess, is saying, well, actually, how did that budget over get to that point? Sure, what point got to or anything, but
That one was phenomenally large.
but it's about the controls and making sure that budget overrun is being picked up through the necessary reports. And it shouldn't be picked up through reports that go every quarter anyway to special resources. That should be providing the control to make sure it's being picked up by members and being picked up to them.
So what we're saying is basically maybe have a look at in some future work program.
Yeah, so I mean, you could look at the performance framework to make sure that the right reporting is taking place, and you get the assurance statements coming through each year to make sure that the heads of service are certifying that those controls are in place.
Well, taking council officials' point, let's put that in some future work program.
But it must be noted that I do think that it was fair and that one was picked up by officers. So I'm not saying there's a failing in the way it was. Perhaps just the way the questions worded that's got that response.
It should be picked up by those performance reviews.
And on this occasion, it was picked up. I think the officers, I believe that both of you flagged this one up. It's very close to the change from committee, from the executive to the committee, and it was picked up very early in the term. And as chief executive.
John?
The question 41 was around receiving the external audit report, which obviously, members do receive as obviously key reports, is audit findings report, and obviously the annual audit report will come. There's likewise question 43 around reviewing the management letter representation. 4 responded yes, 5 didn't know. That's the letter of representation that came last month in the September meeting. So it doesn't come regularly, but it comes once a year before doing the report. So again, when the questionnaire is filled out, members might have forgotten that it came in September last year. Question 45 talked about a mechanism for keeping aware of topical legal and regulatory issues. 4 answered don't know. I think as Pete alluded to in his external auditor report, quite a few topical updates that he includes as part of his update report. So that does come through as part of the external audit report. Also the internal audit reports actually touch on regulatory issues as part of their audit reports that come forward in the progress updates. Similarly, yes, obviously we touched on training, also the member training programme and some of the LGA training. And obviously in terms of forward training around fraud and awareness, we've got Ken Johnson coming to the full council meeting in January, I think it is, to provide some fraud awareness training for members as well. So quite a wide ranging route of sort of member training opportunities there. Moving towards, I think there weren't many more that weren't answered. Yes, predominantly
76.
76.
26.
I think question 57, I just want to refer to, which was around, sorry, Jeff.
I'm thinking we could have finished about for 7.
Pushing me, Jeff. This was around, has the governance committee considered the information it wishes to receive from internal audit? 7 answered yes, 2 didn't know. I suppose my question to you is, are you happy with the information you're getting from internal audit, or is there anything else you would like to see coming through from the team in terms of reporting style of the reports that we get? I think there's been a slight change from the internal audit reports we used to get from Mazars. These reports are very
Personally, I think, I don't know what members think, but I think they're a lot more easier to understand than the last reports. And I do like the sort of okay, limited assurance, all that with the you know, you highlight the facts that we should be looking at as members. I do like that. And it's so much easier, the layout's a lot easier. And I know in other spheres of that they, you know, the tables all the coloured dots and stuff that you bring as well, I think is really good for members to highlight the key areas most at risk to the organisation. One thing I will say, following on from this, do we need to add to the corporate risk register this current financial situation? Is it on there?
On there anyway, in terms of that sort of inability to balance budgets, etc. So that's always been on there. It's always been a risk.
It's more of a risk at the moment.
More personal, obviously subject to members' decisions next Wednesday. Hopefully, members will make those informed decisions and allow us to bring forward then a balanced budget for 23-24.
But members, do you expect?
Do the internal auditors believe that there are other methods which should be considered by this committee that might, we see what we get, we assess what we get, but I guess they know how a lot of other councils do it, and maybe a future agenda item might be to look at the way other councils do it, even if this is the best way.
So just on that, actually interesting that I'm looking at a document now that I've put together, reviewing all the papers being submitted to all the other district councils in Devon. And we're going to compare and contrast and say, well, obviously it's part of the work. These are the documents for the last 2 years that committees have received, and for you to look at and say, well, you know, for the storage, I know have an annual review of the waivers, procurement waivers that are did, and to review for whether the waivers are, you know, are okay or not. So as I said, I'm doing this review at the moment, so you know you should be receiving that in
I think that'd be very good. I think
several weeks' time. Well,
Yes, because I think John is a mind reader. He specifically wanted to hone in on 57. Either he's well informed or he just knows how
John,
things are going to happen.
76 now. But seriously, on a serious note, I think that is really good, because that's a good piece of work, so the committee can see the benchmarking aspect of it. And I think it's always good to look at what other organisations are doing. We don't become insular. So really, if you could, when you finish that report, if Kate can send it around to all committee members, that would be really interesting to read and be very informative to us. Good plan. Thank you. 76.
I was going to 76. This question was talking about assessing and discussing the culture of the organisation, including the tone from the top. 5 answered yes, 3 no. I suppose looking at culture, pieces of work that we have had carried out, obviously we have the LGA peer review, a subsequent revisit and report that was produced, which obviously was circulated to all members. And again, I suppose it's a question back to members. Is there further work you would like us to do in terms of assessing that culture, work that we can do with the formal team in terms of internal audits around how we assess culture in the organisation? So the peer review, I think, gave a very reflective view in terms of where the organisation is, work it's carried out, where it was progressing to. That did sort of touch on culture as well, just whether you want to see any further pieces of work embedded into the work programme.
Yeah, Councillor Bush.
I specifically would like to look into how the organisation is changing, bearing in mind the HSE's stresses upon mental health. I understand that is something that the council is looking into, but I think it would be nice to bring it back to this committee so we can understand that some psychology, some education in it. Personally, I'd like to see us move forward in the best way possible, and I'm sure that we are doing that, and I know there is work ongoing at the moment, so it might be premature to have it come to the committee directly, but I guess there is a deadline set by HSE for when we need to have looked into the changes that they've made.
Yeah, I mean, we circulated after the last meeting, we circulated the work that organisation development team have been engaged on, which covers not just mental health, but the whole of the organisation through the organisational development team they've set up. That report can be circulated or brought back formally to the committee if you like, in the discussion. The the other areas that you have, yes, you talk about the culture of the organisation. I mean, that's not just the officer culture, that's member culture as well. So you do get the report back about complaints that have been raised about member. So that goes to the the culture of the organisation. And just thinking back to sort of the first work for this committee, that was around the committee system that was used. And part of that committee system that was used was a refreshed culture around collaborative work. And I think, if I'm rightly, in the first year of this committee being in existence, you did review that committee system to see whether it was working properly. We did and were satisfied with it. So that's not been brought back since. We could do something along those lines as well. So you have done work that looks at the cultural organisation, but probably the Councillor Bush was talking about is the report that is circulated, setting out the work of the organisation development.
Yeah, sure. I think that would make a lot of sense, Ken, because obviously none of us know in what 6 months' time any of us will be sitting here, so you know the council. So we've got a benchmark, if you like, at the beginning. It'd be made quite useful next council to have a benchmark at the end of this board, how the council has been operating under this new system. I just think it makes sense. I suppose the other thing which I have to keep pulling myself back on, even after 3 years on this committee, 4 years on this committee, with governance, I'm not here to go into the devil of the detail of it and be hands-on management. Just here overseeing that all these processes are there, and I do find that quite difficult. Not to suddenly think, I want to get involved in it, because that isn't what I'm here to do. I think I just have to keep reminding myself of that. I'm sure what we must do as well. I think it'd be really useful to see what the perceptions are now of the committee system you've got in the council from where it was 4 years ago.
So I know the chief exec really thrives on this sort of thing anyway. I remember him talking to me right at the very beginning, how he loves culture, organisational matters, absolutely top notch. So what I'd like then, Ken, with the committees one just had there, is is our exit survey. So this is the cultural one. Only because there's an election in May. So if none of us actually ever make it, we feel as though we've had a real good exit survey with yourself.
Yeah.
So I think if you could provide that information, and I think that's what you were alluding to, Councillor Anderson, is that actually it creates a benchmark then for internal auditors to actually assess going forward, and for the new council who takes over from May onwards.
So I think that's a good idea. We can do that. We can put some sort of survey out to members and say, we can cover the whole of the event, not just the committee system, how it's worked, but training and support we provide with it, etc.
And it's also about what we were talking about, what we've got limited assurance on at the moment. It's about the inclusivity and diversity of the workforce, and how we're attracting people to come and work for us, and that retention element and all that. So I think all that's got to do with the culture of the place and how we actually keep our staff. And I think that's it's a big one, that. So that's why I say go straight to 76, John. We diverted on to 57.
Apologise, Chair.
Yeah. So yes, that is more work going forward, and you get some of those comments.
We'll come on to the web program.
77.
Thank you, Chair. So again, just the committee asked officers what independent assurance is sought. Again, majority of answers were yes or no. Again, there's the independent assurance sought, like through the internal auditors, external auditors, obviously through the Grant Thornton. In terms of that external review, benchmarking and value for money opinion, obviously does go into that level of detail as well, come from the external auditors. So again, that sort of answers off hopefully the answer of no in terms of actually that's where the independent assurance is sought. That pretty much concludes the general answers. Questions 80 onwards sort of went into a bit more narrative, some specific points. Again, I'm not going to go into those in much detail. One of the questions asked about sort of value of assets and loans. That does come through in terms of the statement of accounts when you receive those in September. And just talking about that last point you touched on, I think it was on the final points, talked about how would you improve the committee that's working. It did touch in there about a complete review of the committee structure. I suppose just talked about that last point about reviewing the structure that we've had and how it's worked over the last term of the election. So, as I said, we did do a review after 12 months. So bringing something back, I think, would be a valuable piece of work. And the only other one I just want to touch on is 84. Talked about potentially having an independent expert. Some councils and their governance and audit committees do have an independent member. We have been talking about that through the Devon Section 151 group around the district councils may want to think about maybe sharing an independent member rather than having one each. That's something that's being discussed at the Devon District Council. So that hopefully concludes the evaluation. Like I say, nothing significant that was coming out. Generally, all very positive. Some areas just in terms of where there were sort of unknowns, just to sort of reassure members that when that activity does take place.
Yeah.
And hopefully points a positive picture, but some very valid points come out that hopefully we can take towards the action and the work programme.
And thank you, members, for filling it out. I mean, it was, as stated, it was really good that we got that through our clerk. It's badgering us to get it done, but it's actually really, really good because it's really important that we fill those out because it does give a context where people can actually put things down anonymously as well. So it's really good. So thank you for doing that. So can I have a proposal that we know the report? Councillor Walker, seconded. Councillor Shaw, all in favour? Thank you very much. Item 10. Over to consider the work programme 2022 to 23, pages 85 to 88.
On the discussion. Add in item the housing now.
Pull that to the next meeting, please.
January. And just looking at January's work programme, you've got update the governance. So that fits in with the item that we were just talking about. So trying to do is get some sort of survey out to members right across the council, about cultural, etc. System works that we just talked about. I think that is probably that item in January as well. They should give us some time to get the survey ended.
Members okay with that?
Yeah, could we add in the procedures towards making sure that resolutions are followed and brought back to council to make sure there's some check digits in there? I think that's part of our job, isn't it?
Are you alluding to the
Well, just resolutions in general to make sure that, you know, that the correct procedures are there to make sure that they don't get missed off.
Yeah, well, as I've explained, it was an error. It wasn't picked up by anybody right through to the chairman's briefing. Shouldn't have happened.
I was just wondering if we could put in some procedures to make sure
I
that
think what we're saying,
doesn't get forgotten.
it's there already, Matt, but we missed it.
The procedures are there, Chair. The procedures normally when the minutes are done, the minutes obviously through Bev's teams, the member services team do pick up the actions from the minutes to make sure they're embedded in the conversations for the chair meeting. Like I said, somewhere along the line we've missed that, and we've been so open and honest about that. The procedures are there. We'll just make sure which they are.
Yeah. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, could we put something in the January work programme about the affect any changes in Thursday's autumn statement as on
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, obviously I'll be reporting that for council next Wednesday anyway. It's obviously the autumn statement. We've reduced the report that's coming to full council. Obviously the autumn statement in terms of what impact that has on when we present it. The updated members this week. Again, it can come to governance, but I suppose I'll be replicating what I'll be doing before council next week. Yeah, by January, we'll have the actual finance settlement, which will then be what goes into the creation of the budget, which comes to strategy and resources in February. Just trying to understand where the role of the governance committee will come in that, because we'll be updating members, I suppose, through.
I suppose what Councillor Walker might consider is that from the January time, things will be put in place. So by the March, we can assess whether the governance arrangements around such new workings that might be imposed on the council.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it, Chair, on the January work programme, we've got the corporate risk register. As we've just said, the financial situation is not risk. So we can update as part of that.
That will be.
Any additional risk you can
Yeah,
find associated
very
with
useful.
the statement.
Or any mini budget that comes between now and January.
I mean, I mean,
Chancellor.
declare an interest now as Devon County Councillor, and Paul, you declare an interest with me, I suppose. You know, Devon County Council, I've got no money. You know, John Hart has been out there, done a big press release saying to the government, give us money. With £75 million in the red. Kent and somewhere else. I've written Hampshire, is it? I've written openly to the government saying we need money, otherwise we're going to go bankrupt. And you know, this council is no different from any other council. We have got to make sure that we get that on the corporate register. And obviously after Thursday, I would expect the committee, obviously, I'd expect that the corporate risk register will be amended accordingly.
It will, yeah. So the corporate risk register will be reviewed in advance of January. Bring it back in January is that reviewed register. So that will take account of implications from the autumn statement or other statements between now and January.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, the autumn statement obviously is next week, but by the time we do the corporate risk register, we'll also have the detailed finance settlement.
Yeah.
That gives us our actual number. So the update and what we update on the corporate risk register will be the position.
Look, I propose that we receive the work plan additions. Councillor Henderson, seconded, Councillor Bushnell, all in favour? Says. Members, unbelievable, it's not even 8 o'clock. Seriously, thank you, you can all go home now if you want.